Can you please turn to SCE 9?
I'm there.
And I believe that you've sponsored on page 6, subsection B, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And here you state that Mr. Bertoko's testimony regarding Song's staffing is incorrect. Is that still your testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And then moving to page 5, lines 19 through 21.
Counsel, that's not part of his testimony.
I understand. I'm going to ask him a question about it. I'm going to ask him if he agrees with it. So in this testimony, I'll start with, this is Mr. Perez's testimony. And he says, for example, SCE is required by the technical specifications under its NRC operating license to, quote, maintain structures, systems, and components to provide a reasonable assurance of adequate safety for the entire site, end quote. Do you agree with that testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And is this language the actual language in the NRC operating license?
I don't know.
Okay, so you don't know if this is this language, quote, maintain structures, systems, and components to provide a reasonable assurance of adequate safety for the entire site, end quote. You don't know if that language is a direct quote from the NRC operating license?
I don't think that actually accurately characterizes Mr. Perez's testimony. He does not excerpt from the license. You use the phrase quote.
Right, I'm saying quote. I was quoting Mr. Perez's testimony, and my question was whether that his quote was taken from an NRC operating license. That's all.
You read it in a fashion that started reading his testimony and then interjected a quote. That's all I was observing. What I don't know is whether this is Mr. Perez's paraphrase or summary of the technical specifications, or if it's an actual excerpt. I don't know.
Okay. Now, in going to, well, let's stick with this SC9, so we don't have to go back and forth. Page 6, lines 1 through 4. And earlier you mentioned something about how Song's units 2 and 3 have common components, and so sometimes you can't break out the costs of repairs unit by unit. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And here, well, actually, starting back on page 5, last line, Song structures, systems, and components must be kept in a state of operability to bring songs 2 online when regulatory approval is granted. Then, also because Song's units 2 and 3 have many common components, e.g. seawater intake, one unit cannot be completely isolated from the other. The shared components must be kept in an operable state, even if only one unit is returned to service. Now, my question is, what are some components that are not shared between units 2 and 3?
I can give you examples. There are switches unique to relays unique to each unit. There is the respective containment domes themselves. As we've learned, they all have separate steam generators. Let me think. Those are the ones that come to mind.
Okay.
There's conduit, there's cabling, there's
Okay,
Which is-
those are good examples. And then moving to page 8 of SCE 9. Starting at line 16. It says other equipment, and again, this is Mr. Perez's testimony, I acknowledge, but I'm going to ask if you agree with it. Other equipment in the plant must remain operational and in service even with both units offline. This includes plant electrical systems, lubricating oil systems, compressed air systems, water purification systems, plant drainage and sump systems, used fuel storage systems, and plant security systems. All of the components involved in these systems must be routinely checked for proper operation. Do you agree with that testimony?
Objection, Your Honor. I don't think this is an efficient use of our limited time. A different witness is sponsoring this testimony. I don't see why it's relevant whether this witness agrees with it.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree.
Okay, so I can't ask witness his agreement with other testimony? I mean, that just doesn't even seem, I've never heard of an objection like that.
You've not established that Mr. Warden is an engineer or that he's an operational person,
I'm asking if he agrees with the testimony. What's wrong with that?
but you haven't laid the foundation that he's in a position to do that.
He's a regulatory person,
But you're asking operational questions.
and the testimony all along by Mr. Perez, and I want to know from Mr. Warden, that these operations are required by NRC licenses and technical specifications and all the other ambiguous language that's been used in this testimony. So I think it's entirely appropriate for me to ask these questions of Mr. Warden. If he doesn't know, or he cannot tell me whether he agrees or not with this testimony, that's fine.
Objection. I reiterate my objection, Your Honor, particularly given the lateness of the hour. We should be limiting the cross-examination to the testimony that Mr. Warden is sponsoring.
All right, sustained.
No.
A note for others at the council table, please quiet during the cross-examination.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, were you talking to me? Or?
No.
Oh, okay. Does the NRC operation license require equipment to remain operational and in service even with both units offline?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay, well, is he a regulatory person? And do you know, are you familiar with the licenses? Maybe I misunderstood. Are you familiar with operating licenses?
Same objection, Your Honor, unless she can point to a particular portion of the testimony that Mr. Warden is sponsoring.
This is cross-examination.
I understand.
You've posed these questions to the other operational people who sponsored the testimony, both Mr. Perez and Mr. Polisano.
So does that mean, I just want to make sure I understand.
You haven't established that Mr. Warden has any that he has any basis to answer the operational questions that is in the testimony of the engineers.
Okay. My question is specifically whether or not, Mr. Warden, you are familiar with the NRC operation license.
I object, Your Honor, unless she can point to a page and line number of Mr. Warden's testimony. We should be limiting the cross-examination at this late hour to portions of Mr. Warden's testimony that he is sponsoring.
Well, I mean, it's either a yes or no question. I don't understand why you're fighting so hard against this. Is it because it's 2:30, or
Yes.
is it because you don't want Mr. Warden to answer the question?
Because it's 2:30, and we have a lot of witnesses we still need to get through.
Okay.
And we should be, in our position is, we should be limiting the examination to the testimony Mr. Warden has sponsored.
If it was 10 a.m. this morning, would you be objecting?
Let's cut this off. Ms. Venskis, is there someplace you're going with this that is in the witness's testimony?
You know, really, at this point, all I want is an answer to that one question. Because it'll help me in my argument in my opening brief.
As to whether your question was so vague, you're not going to get anything out of it.
Why?
Is he familiar with the license? What does that tell you?
Yes,
It doesn't tell you
does he-
anything you can use.
Okay, so I'm being told that I can't ask this line of questioning, so, because it's 2:30. So for the record, I'm just going to say that.
The question is vague. What does
Why
that
is the
mean?
question, okay,
It's not tied to anything, it's not right. If you can make a narrow question,
Okay.
maybe you could find it, but I'm not seeing it, and Judge Dudney's not seeing it. So
okay.
I think you get one more try.
I'll take one more shot at this. Have you read the NRC operating license?
No.
Okay, thank you. So that would mean that you're not familiar with it.
That's two
That's
questions.
two questions.
Just for the record, which was my original question. Okay.
And let's try to keep the cross for the rest of the afternoon focused on the testimony, which is the function of cross, because we are still trying to hold on to the hope that we finish, and rather than put all the parties through the financial and other resources burdens that would follow from rolling these hearings into next week.
All right.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to go off the record then, because I'm going to have to look at some of my questions and cut them
All right, off
down.
the record. Okay, while we were off the record, Ms. Spenskis has indicated she wants more time, so we're going to go ahead and move on to additional cross-examination, starting with Ms. Sullivan. Before we do that, I want to note that due to the schedule, I'm going to exercise my authority under Rule 13.5 to limit our further cross-examination here and try and get Mr. Warden done in about an hour. So, Ms. Sullivan, we'll give you 20 minutes.
I think I had more than that
Yes, and
time for Mr. Warden, so that's not going to cover it.
Well, we'll take it as it comes, but we have judicial discretion to do that, so we're trying to move through these hearings and avoid duplicate questions, so hopefully you will have short questions that come to the point and you make the best use of your time.
all right, thank you. Ms. Sullivan, go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Warden. I
Hello.
just want to, I am like, just so anybody who is watching the webcast. Okay. I just want to start off, make sure we're on the same page. Item 3 of the scoping memo for Phase 1 includes a review of the reasonableness and effectiveness of SCE's actions and expenditures for community outreach and emergency preparedness related to the song's outages. So, just so we're there.
What, is that a question?
No. You agree that that's item 3 of the scoping memo for Phase 1?
I take your word for it. I haven't looked at it for a
Thank
while.
you.
Let's move on.
Thank you. In SCE 9, the rebuttal testimony, the portion that you sponsored, page 25 to 26, starts at the bottom of page 25, and then there's a footnote on page 26.
Yes, I see
Are
that.
you there?
Yes.
You cite an NRC consultant's report on focus groups and surveys in evacuation planning zones. When and where were these focus groups and surveys conducted?
I believe it was in about 2008, and there were several locations around the country. I don't recall them exactly, and I'm not sure if San Onofre was among them.
Okay. And how would a report prepared in 2008 be relevant to the San Onofre outages of 2012?
Well, the report went to knowledge about emergency preparedness, and it was just an indication that the communication tools required by the NRC and FEMA work and achieve their objective of informing people in the EPZ how they should react in the case of an emergency.
But you're not presenting this as an indication as to how effective Edison communications and actions were relevant to the 2012 outage.
Not specifically, but I am pointing to it in terms of the success of the NRC mandated communication tools.
Okay. I've recirculated CDSO Exhibit 9. It's been marked, I believe.
Yes. All right. So CDSO 9 is marked. Ms. Sullivan, please introduce that for the record.
I'm sorry?
Please describe briefly what the
Okay.
exhibit is.
This is a description of the California Nuclear Energy Response Program from the California Emergency Management Agency. Do you have that, Mr. Warden?
Yes.
Do you need another copy?
No, I have it. Is
No,
this?
that's not it. It's
Oh.
CDSO 9.
Let's go off the record.
Off the record.
Do you need another copy?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Mr. Warden, are you familiar with the California Nuclear Emergency Response Program?
Generally.
Generally. Does SCE pay into the Special Assessment Fund for this program?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Why does your rebuttal of Women's Energy Matters testimony on community outreach and emergency preparedness ignore the California Nuclear Energy Emergency Response Program?
Can you point to my testimony reference?
It's section, I believe it starts on page 20 of SCE 9, section 4E.
Off the record, real quick. Mike, SCE 9 doesn't go to 20.
SCE 9. So you were rebutting WEM's testimony, which did reference this program, but you made absolutely no reference of it. You totally ignored it.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if that's a question, and is your premise that... when
My
we request
original
testimony,
question
one
was,
has to-
why did
Excuse
you
me, Ms. Sullivan.
ignore the California Nuclear Emergency Response Program?
I did not itemize it in my rebuttal. On page 21, line 9, I do make the point that WEM does not dispute that SCE remains in full compliance with its requirements, nor does WEM argue that SCE's failed to comply with any federal, state, or county regulations regarding emergency preparedness. I meant that as an overall observation. The fact I did not itemize this California program was not intended to imply that...
I have a few more questions on that. Now, specifically, the California Nuclear Emergency Response Program provides that under state law, counties have the authority and responsibility to protect the lives and property of their citizens. The state supports their emergency response activities involved in nuclear power plant planning. Why does SCE fail to acknowledge this state law, nor the authority it confers on Cal EMA as the coordinating agency for utility, local, state, federal agencies? That's basically my question.
We don't ignore that, and as a matter of fact, the bulk of the primary reaction to an emergency is coordinated with the Interjurisdictional Planning Committee, which is comprised of the local governments in the areas around San Onofre.
The Nuclear Power Plant Emergency Response Plan establishes the State of California's emergency response organization and defines the role of Cal EMA as the coordinating agency for utility, local, state, federal, and voluntary agency response to a nuclear power plant incident. And I haven't been able to find anywhere where Edison specifically acknowledges that role of Cal EMA or of the Department of Health Services, which is also conferred with a very important specific role in emergency preparedness and response. Can you point to someplace where that is acknowledged and where Edison actively complies with this state law?
We do in our regular consultations and coordination and drilling through the Interjurisdictional Planning Committee that it's the counties, it's Camp Pendleton, it's the cities in the area, and then in the regular drills we coordinate with various state agencies as well. Believe me, there is no intent to exclude any at all. Consultation, drilling, and tight coordination is one of the things we focus on repeatedly. And I wouldn't want you to be left with the sense that we're excluding any of the requisite agencies.
Well, that is the impression that is left, because again,
that's an accurate advice you're receiving from your...
I appreciate that, Your Honor.
You need to focus the question.
The California Nuclear Power Preparedness Program establishes 3 zones around each plant to detail required activities in the event of an accident. Why does SCE only reference 1, the basic evacuation planning zone, which is within 10 miles?
I think if I recall an earlier cross-examination exhibit, there's 3 zones, and each zone has a priority and a specific action plan in the unlikely event of an emergency. And that's NRC established. Believe me, there's no Edison authored different plan than what is required by the government agencies.
Why is there a difference between the public education zone that Edison identifies on its website and the public education zone that is specified in the state law?
I believe they're the same. The math is close.
If you'll look about...
Allow the witness to finish.
The first zone, the EPZ, is intended to be generally a 10-mile radius. In San Onofre's instance, in the northern radius, it's greater than 10 miles to pick up, I believe, San Juan Capistrano or one of the cities. Then the additional 10 miles gets you there for the second zone. I think it's 10 plus
If I can
20.
direct you to, let's see, the 1, 2, 3, 4. The second paragraph from the bottom of CDSO 9.
Okay.
This is what the state specifies as the public education zone. Can you tell me why Edison doesn't employ that definition?
Well, it does say approximate, and I don't know why there is a difference in those numerical miles.
And you'll acknowledge that the state definition is approximately 35 miles from the plan?
Yes, but I believe this is general to the state and not specific to San Onofre, if I read it.
Well, Mr. Warden, how many nuclear plants are there in California?
There is Diablo. There are 2 commercial operating reactors. There are academic institutions with reactors.
If I may direct you, in the government code that establishes this program, it specifically refers to Diablo Canyon and San Onofre.
And my point is, I'm not familiar with the Diablo Canyon zones. Therefore, the 35 may be the average of the 2. It may be intended to, I don't know.
So your answer is that you wouldn't accept this as the standard for San Onofre?
Not as I sit here today, but having said that, it's due to the fact I'm not that familiar with this document as I am with the SONGS and NRC specific documents. My expectation is that we comply with both.
Okay. Let's go on to the next question. What have Edison's actions regarding the ingestion pathway zone and an approximately 50-mile radius around the plant to mitigate the effects on agriculture and food processing and distribution?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
What have been Edison's actions to mitigate the effects on agriculture and food processing distribution within that 50-mile ingestion pathway zone relative to community outreach and emergency preparedness?
I don't believe there's anything to mitigate. The actions in the emergency steps require planning. I'm talking about the planning, the distribution of the information, and that 50-mile radius is intended in the event of an accident to be sure that we take all steps to protect food sources and livestock from ingesting the contamination. I'm taking your question, perhaps it's my error, asking what we're doing to take steps now to mitigate the radiation. There's not been a release of the radiation.
Does Edison distribute a brochure that's been prepared by the Department of Health Services for agriculture, food processors and distributors within the 50-mile ingestion pathway?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So you do distribute that?
Yeah, and we make it available, I believe, on electronically, and there's outreach associated with it. It is not as exhaustive as it is on the 10-mile radius of the EPZ.
And do you identify who the recipients of this information ought to be?
I believe they do, yes.
Can you refer me to a reference for that information?
I can interview them again and get it for you.
Okay. So that's something you can provide to me?
Right. How we disseminate that information.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Sullivan,
What have
wrapping up.
been Edison's actions regarding the public education zone approximately 35 miles from the plant as defined in the state's nuclear emergency response program?
There are materials made available specific to the direction to understand how to react in an emergency. There's the siren drills that I believe can be heard in some instances as far away as that. We coordinate with local officials in that zone as well. There are specific materials. One of the things that's important is that it's an important safety measure that in each of those radius zones, that in the event of emergency, people act as planned. Because if everybody tried to evacuate in all 50 miles, you have the potential of not having anyone evacuate, because specifically if you look going south on I-5, you really only have one egress.
And isn't that, in fact, a point that the Government Accountability Office raised in a March 2013 emergency report, preparedness report, that's in SCE 32?
I've read that report. I think the concern about the traffic issue overall came from the County of Los Angeles, not from the County of San Diego, that reference.
All right, Ms. Sullivan, 5 minutes.
I'm sorry.
5 minutes, please.
Okay. My question. Just wait a second, okay? In what forms does Edison publish and disseminate information for transient population?
We have materials that we make available to hotels, motels. If you go camping at San Onofre Beach, there are materials there. We have outreach to other assorted places where people stay. We try to capture that transient population that comes and goes there, primarily through the hotels, the campgrounds, those kinds of places.
So is that limited to the 10-mile zone?
Yes.
Now, one of the recommendations in this GAO report was that to better inform efforts for nuclear power plant preparedness and planning, we recommend the NRC commissioners obtain information on public awareness of radiological emergency preparedness outside the 10-mile emergency planning zone. Has Edison, I mean, you provided this report, have you sought to revise your distribution plan?
I would make a couple of observations. I read that report several weeks ago. Number one, the NRC takes issue with some interpretation of the data in the GAO report, so it's not definitive. The second thing is, if you look, and I can find the page, it also observes that the NRC and FEMA are in the midst of an update of their evacuation and emergency reaction criteria in light of Fukushima. And so there is an analysis underway to update their protocols.
I just have a couple more questions on the community outreach and emergency preparedness. And again, the California Nuclear Emergency Response Program direct that planning and preparedness are cooperative efforts by state agencies, local jurisdictions, and the utility. And it's to result in a cadre of trained emergency responders. Who are the cadre of trained emergency responders within the 50-mile ingestion pathway zone?
I don't know who they are within the 50-mile.
That's my question.
Okay, because it started out at the 30.
But my question is about the 50-mile.
I don't know who they are in the 50-mile. I know we do significant outreach to organizations like schools, school bus drivers, search and rescue teams. I don't know the exact geographical limit where those outreach and education efforts take place.
Do hospitals within that 50-mile ingestion pathway zone have radiological detectors and trained personnel to respond to a radiological emergency?
Well, I hope they do, because most of the radiation is medically related. It's
But
not
you don't
related.
know.
Let him finish.
They have to have it because they have x-rays every day. So the majority of the radiation is medical related, not related to the power plant. So they have to have that.
And one more important question. How does Edison communicate with the 85-plus languages that are reflected in San Diego and Orange and Los Angeles County and to effectively meet the public information demands by the state and federal government?
If we get a request to translate materials, we will of course do our best. And we just haven't had any inquiries. I've interviewed our folks several times, and they say we don't hear from people. We don't know if there are not people who are contacting us, clamoring for materials in a language we don't provide. In the jurisdictions that cross the 5% threshold, we have in-language materials.
So you're just reactive to who requests the information?
No, not only that. We seek it out where we can. We try to be responsive where we can, but we can't solve every problem.
All right. Thank you.
I have 5 more minutes, and I know more of my questions.
All right.
5 minutes.
All right. 5 minutes, Ms. Venskis.
And then Ms. George.
Yes. Ms. George, up next after Ms. Venskis.
Are we taking a break before?
No. Okay, go ahead, Ms.
Okay,
Venskis.
back to SCE-07, which is the rebuttal to the DRA system.
I'm there.
Page 4, lines 10 and 11. Actually, let's go to lines 11 and 13 first. Page 4. This is your testimony, correct, on page 4, Mr. Warden?
Yes.
Okay. And it says here on page 4, line 11, quote, "Ratepayers should pay the full amount of those recorded expenditures, including the inspection and repair costs, subject to an offset if and to the extent SCE recovers those costs from Mitsubishi." Is that still your testimony today?
Yes.
What is the basis for your claim that ratepayers should pay the full amount of all of the recorded 2012 song expenditures if SCE does not recover costs from Mitsubishi?
It's a fundamental tenet of cost of service rate making. And the Commission has held that if the costs we incur are reasonable in their judgment, then we're allowed to recover those expenses in rates.
And when you say the Commission has held, you mean in other decisions with respect to other facilities?
Yes, yes. As a general policy, if expenses and capital investments are found to be reasonable, then they are to be reflected in customer rates and we're allowed to defray those expenses.
Okay. And is it also your position that ratepayers should pay the full amount of the 2012 recorded expenditures subject to an offset if and to the extent SCE recovers from the NEALS policy or costs from NEALS?
Yes.
Okay. And when, we discussed the difference between the term expenditures and expenses. So my question is, with respect to this position that you take on lines 11 to 13 about ratepayers paying the full amount of those recorded expenditures, would your answer be the same with respect to expenses?
Yes.
I'm sorry, which
Okay.
policy, which NEO policy are we talking about?
I'm sorry, let me just restate the question so it's very clear. So my question is, on line 11, you state ratepayers should pay the full amount of those recorded expenditures, including the inspection and repair costs, subject to an offset if and to the extent SCE recovers those costs from Mitsubishi, right? And in that statement, you use the term recorded expenditures. And my question is, would you also make that statement with respect to recorded expenses?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And now with respect to page 4, line 10, could we go there? This is again at SCE 7, rebuttal to DRA testimony.
Yes.
And you state, SCE has shown that all of its recorded 2012 songs expenditures were reasonable in light of the facts known at the time those actions were taken. Is that still your testimony today?
Yes, expenditures and expenses.
Thank you. And what is the basis for your conclusion that all of SCE's expenditures were reasonable?
Mr. Perez's testimony went through them project by project and demonstrated they were reasonable.
Okay, so your testimony is based on Mr. Perez's testimony.
My testimony is based on the same facts that Mr. Perez testified to.
Oh, okay, so do you have personal knowledge of those facts that Mr. Perez testified to?
Many of them.
Okay, and do you have personal knowledge of which systems must be operated pursuant to the NRC license during song's extended outage?
I'm familiar with some of the systems.
Okay. Okay, I won't go there, I promise, but, all right, duly noted. And then finally, again, making that distinction between expenses and expenditures, is it your testimony that SC has shown that all of its recorded 2012 songs expenses were reasonable in light of the facts known at the time those actions were taken?
Yes.
And is your basis for drawing that conclusion also based on Mr. Perez's testimony in part?
In part, but I'm more familiar with the operating expenses than the specific capital projects because they're mostly labor of the workforce.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions.
All right, thank you. Ms. George, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
All right, you have until 3:45. All right.
Yeah, everybody's got them, and there's your stuff. The attachments.
Ms. George, did you hear? You have until 3:45. Okay, please speak into the microphone.
Do you have our exhibits handy? We're going to be looking at the WIM opening testimony,
Okay.
attachments 3 and attachment 5.
All right. Yeah, go real quick.
Okay.
Ms. George, we're going to mark the exhibits.
Okay, so we have marked, and I'll refer to them all by number. When you use them, please identify them. So we have WIM 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 have all been marked. So as you use them, please identify what it is before you ask the question.
I stop at 7.
Yes, I will be happy to do that.
I got the advice.
Off the record, briefly.
8 through 11.
All right. Yeah. Ms. George, we need you.
NRC requires emergency preparedness and notification resources, whose activities are summarized below.
Could you tell me the page number again?
Page 4.
Are we in SCE 4?
That's right.
I didn't hear a question.
The question is whether beyond the NRC and FEMA have certain requirements, but beyond that, do they dictate exact language, drawings, and diagrams for your outreach materials? And do they dictate to you which community groups or what types of community groups you should approach?
They provide guidance and suggested text and design of materials, but we develop the final product. They don't dictate specifically which person to reach out to or which entity to reach out to. We do our best to try to reach everyone who can.
So you have a fair amount of editorial control, creative control over those materials that you're producing?
No.
I mean, beyond the requirements, do you have control over the editorial content of your work, or is there a standard language that you are required to use?
We adhere closely to what the NRC recommends. Now, we may use different graphics or so forth and things like that, but we don't view this as a branding exercise. The goal of the communication is to make sure that our customers have everything they need to be prepared in the unlikely event of an emergency. And we take that seriously. These are not advertising or branding exercises.
I'm referring you to the WEM opening testimony, which is WEM 2, attachments 3, which is a brochure, the Edison brochure for emergency preparedness information. This is produced with ratepayer money, Mr. Warden, is that correct?
I don't have it yet.
Okay.
Can we go off the record for a moment? I can't. Could you repeat, Ms. George, what we're looking at?
All right.
I didn't have that in my notes.
On the record, while we were off the record, we clarified that the brochure is marked as WEM Exhibit 10.
On page 3, there is a diagram with emergency. It's a map with the emergency planning zone, zone 1, 2, public education zone, and 3, ingestion pathway zone. What cities are in the ingestion pathway?
Are you asking him to provide a list of all the cities right
No,
now?
I'm asking whether cities such as Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim, and San Diego are within the ingestion pathway. Is that 50 miles?
I'm trying to do the arithmetic in my head, Ms. George. I don't know the exact radius for San Diego County for sure, but I don't know where the city limits start.
And what about Los Angeles and Long Beach and Anaheim?
No, they would be too far.
Long Beach is more than 50 miles from San Onofre?
Well, it might be right around there. So
What about Irvine?
I can do the math.
You know, Ms. George, you have limited time. Is this really
I'm
you want
wor-
to use your cross time?
Yes, actually it is. If you don't, please.
It's your time.
It's right around 50, 55. My house is 20.
Okay.
I'm
What
doing
about
the math.
Irvine?
Irvine would be within it, yeah.
It's in zone 3.
Yeah.
Why are there no cities or counties listed in the zone 3 on your map?
I don't know.
maybe that would help you answer these questions in the future. On page 5, there's a what is radiation? There is a diagram, a pie chart of sources of exposure. I don't see nuclear power plants on that list, on the pie chart. Is there some reason that nuclear power was eliminated from that pie chart?
The pie chart, I don't know why it was not there, but the pie chart is intended to inform people that there is radiation in our daily lives. And we are exposed to radiation every day. If your kitchen has granite countertops, there's radiation.
But there is also a radiation that comes from nuclear power plants. Not necessarily your nuclear power plant, but you could say that the radiation that's come from Fukushima, which is here now, and from Chernobyl, which is still here, is a source of radiation, is it not, in the environment?
Generally, yes.
Thank you.
In relatively small doses, depending upon where you are.
Yeah, depending on how close you are to Fukushima. Let's look at the WEM attachment 5 to our opening testimony, and I guess that's been renamed also. This is the agriculture brochure put out by California.
Do you know what number of your exhibit?
Well, my exhibit was, I thought that it was attachments to the WEM opening testimony, and so I'm not clear on the way these have been retitled and renumbered.
Off the record while we figure it out.
This is what it looks like.